Ukraine's President Zelensky speaks to the UK Parliament, but the West continues to talk a good fight while thrashing around hopelessly. Meanwhile, more consequences are making themselves felt, and it's an open question whether this war is going to be won or lost on the battlefield or in the marketplace. This is a quick response video update on Wednesday, the 9th of March. President Zelensky made a historic address to the UK Parliament yesterday, and if you contrast it with the events of the last 24 hours, it rather highlights the gap in reality right now. He told Parliament this: "We will fight in the forests, in the fields, on the shores, in the streets." It was evoking the spirit of Churchill, and it gained a hugely positive reception from the assembled parliamentarians, who were united in their admiration, and the press likewise. And then he added, "Please make sure our Ukrainian skies are safe," and the official answer to that is yay, but no. That isn't entirely unreasonable, as we know. 2 tripwires were avoided throughout the long original Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West. The militaries did not directly engage each other in combat, only via proxy wars, which were deadly enough, and nuclear weapons were not used ever. It is by no means proven that to sail over the first line is to commit the world to falling over the second, but Putin's ability to keep everyone anxious about how far he might go makes it rational not to test that unless you really have to. However, right now people are starting to wonder if they really have to anyway. The received wisdom is that Russia has been fighting an abysmal war, and the Ukrainians have been highly competent in contrast, as well as fiercely determined in handing it to them. And with the pressure being ladled onto Moscow with sanctions and the pariah status in every single field that they've achieved, surely, people say, it's just a matter of time before Russia implodes. And I say that's received wisdom. There are similarly strong voices saying, nah, don't pin your hopes on any of that happening. But yes, the Ukrainians have impressed the world with what competence and courage actually looks like. No one's saying that makes them perfect human beings, by the way. Yes, we are all flawed in different ways. But Western defence analysts had agreed before the start of the war with their Russian counterparts in presuming and predicting that Ukraine would collapse quickly in the face of a determined Russian attack. It seems that superior forces and weaponry is no guarantee of competence, and the widely held perception that you have no chance is no reason to accept the prescription and simply fold at the first assault. What the West is really seeing is kind of what we've lost. We used to have such courage and determination. We used to be famed for our competence as well. And maybe we still have that in our well-trained and professional military forces. There's not much evidence of it right now amongst our politicians. Because while Zelensky is being applauded while asking for help, the West has been publicly thrashing about in confusion, in exactly the way that arguably emboldened Putin in the first place. The alliance said it would get MiG-29 jets to Ukraine. Then it said, well, it might not. Then this week, Poland said that it would donate its planes, so long as the US would backfill what they donated with other planes. And the US was kind of up for it, and then suddenly Poland got cold feet and worried that there might be consequences, because, as we said, you might never quite know what Putin would do. Now that's arguably the opposite of courageous. Poland is a member of NATO, so an attack by Putin on Poland would be an escalation to bring NATO into direct conflict with him. But regardless of that, Poland suggested that instead of handing the planes over to, their immediate neighbour right over there, instead they would give them to the Americans by transporting them all the way to the US bases in Germany, which they could then donate them from. And America looked at that and said, no chance. Now, in theory, the same logic applies to both. A third party that happens to be a member of NATO provides Ukraine, which is a free and recognised nation, with military equipment. Entirely legal, kind of appropriate, but for some reason Poland felt that they would be exposed if they did it, while the US felt that if they did it, it might be seen as more provocative than if Poland did it with their support, which also doesn't make sense. And two things come from that. One, Putin has successfully gotten right in their heads, so that they now don't know where the line is, even though what's proposed would not have been seen under normal circumstances as across the line. It's like the chilling effect of censorship when you're not quite sure what the rules are. So you don't take any risks and thereby you self-censor yourself well beyond what was actually prohibited. So it is here. Ukrainian courage is inspiring the West, but apparently not infecting it. Secondly, the real weakness of the alliance is exposed because all of that discussion is happening in public rather than in private. We should be guessing at what they're going to do, and then it will finally be announced as a final decision. Weak politicians, however, keep announcing things early, suddenly becoming aware that they might not have considered the consequences of their actions and then backtracking. And that's what Western politicians have been doing over and over again. The UK government has the benefit of a military and diplomatic presence that is generally still at the moment highly regarded. They even have a defence minister who can talk in complete sentences and walk in a straight line, which, has been enough to get him being talked about as a potential future Prime Minister, because that's how low the bar is right now. But as soon as anything gets close to the rest of government, the ongoing shambles that has marked the last couple of years does its thing. So the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has been told by senior MPs in her own party in no uncertain terms to get a grip amidst chaos in how Britain responds to the Ukrainian refugee crisis. The Home Office operation was described as inept and bureaucratic, as it insisted Ukrainians needed visas to come into the country so none of those other migrants would be able to sneak in along them at the same time. Which, if you could set up a rapid system to work with the people who needed it, might not be an unreasonable way to do it. Look, you can argue it both ways. Fine, I don't care about that. But to set it as the rule and then to jump into action like a rusty tortoise on sedatives, that is going to ramp up the suffering of people who, have just been bombed into oblivion. And you've had the Home Secretary saying one thing in public and then quickly being contradicted by the Prime Minister, which is also a thing that we've seen before. It's all just more of really what we've been seeing from the government since Boris Johnson was elected. But the question is whether this is what we can afford to be seeing at this moment in history. The contrast with Zelensky could not be more stark. Still, the West has been implementing sanctions, and the momentum has kept ratcheting up the pressure on Moscow. The US has now announced that it will be banning the purchase of Russian oil. The UK, which is not so exposed to it as others, has also said that it will aim to phase it out by the end of the year. Europe is way more exposed to it, as I discussed previously, so that is not something that it can match, although it's still talking about an accelerated process of reducing and ultimately removing its dependence. And the consequences for Russia and the rest of the world are continuing to emerge. Russia has suspended the sale of foreign currencies to citizens until at least September. So whatever you've got, you can only take it out in rubles. This is just one indicator of the fact that Russia is expected that it will soon default on its sovereign debt. Fitch has downgraded Russia's debt rating to junk status, and it said this: the further ratcheting up of sanctions and proposals that could limit trade in energy increase the probability of a policy response by Russia that includes at least selective non-payment of its sovereign debt obligations. Russia is due to make its next debt repayment on March the 16th, although it will have a 30-day grace period. Citizens of Russia also got further insights into what it means to live in Moscow after it had twinned itself with Pyongyang as more Western companies pulled out. McDonald's announced that it was shutting up shop, and you might think, so what? But the opening of the very first McDonald's after the collapse of the communist Soviet Union was a huge deal at the time, with thousands of people turning out to symbolically step into a brighter future where, you weren't picking up food from nearly empty shelves for something to eat. Well, that bright future has gone. Coca-Cola, Starbucks, KFC, Pizza Hut, Unilever, the owner of multiple brands, is pulling most products, save for everyday essential food and hygiene ones. But of course, consequences are not restricted to Russia. There was turmoil on the stock markets yesterday as investors piled into perceived safe havens such as gold. Oil prices are surging, particularly after Shell announced that it would stop buying Russian oil on the spot markets, and BP confirmed that it was going to do likewise. One analyst told the Times of London, "This is a market in disarray. Prices could rocket to $200 a barrel by summer, spur a recession, and end the year closer to $50 a barrel. Nothing sounds crazy anymore." The London Metal Exchange halted trading in nickel, an essential component in a lot of the modern tech that we rely on, after prices there had spiralled upwards. Russia is a major exporter of nickel, of course. Meanwhile, in a move pushing against the trend, the BBC has announced that it is resuming English language reporting in Russia. It had paused its coverage when new laws were brought in that allowed journalists to be jailed for up to 15 years if the authorities determined that they'd been spreading fake news. But they decided to test those definitions. And they said this: "We will tell this crucial part of the story independently and impartially, adhering to the BBC's strict editorial standards." They then rather spoiled the effect by lying about one thing at least, although it's a lie they're clearly telling themselves as much as they're telling anyone else. They said, "The safety of our staff in Russia remains our number one priority." People still don't get this basic grown-up trade-off between being useful and being safe. Yes, I applaud the BBC, not often I get to say that, for risking consequences by seeking to put impartial information into a hostile environment that may result in consequences. At last, a British institution with some backbone. But you can't then say with your very next breath that your number one priority is safety for your employees. If that was true, you'd be concentrating on getting them all the hell out of there and off reporting about cats caught up in trees or something. Make your mind up and put some commitment behind it. But of course they can't, because the UK remains gripped in this safetyism culture that has to be paid lip service, even if you're de facto ignoring it. Able to be inspired by Ukrainians fighting for their lives, but still having to be treated like people who must somehow be protected from the world. Meanwhile, freezing cold -10-degree temperatures with wind chill making it feel more like -20 are expected to arrive in parts of Ukraine over the next few days. That will be a problem for both sides, as you would expect, but it's likely to hit the Russians harder. Major Kevin Price, who served in the British Army for 20 years, told the Times of London, "-20 will degrade the Russian force, there is no question. It will improve cross-country mobility because there'll be less mud, but the Russians are not ready for Arctic conditions, and vehicles with a fuel shortage would be unable to run their engines to keep warm. Imagine being sat in a 40-ton iron freezer all night." And right now, NATO military officials are saying that for the first time since the start of the war, their expectation is that Russia will make no significant gains over the next few days. Mind you, freezing temperatures may turn out to be the least of their problems, at least for the troops throwing bombs and bullets at each other in the vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Fighting there has damaged the high-voltage power cable that was reportedly essential to keep the spent nuclear fuel there cooled. The cable needs urgently repairing, but kinda can't be because there's fighting still going on. The plant has emergency diesel generators that will give a 48-hour buffer. After that, you have potentially got real problems. The International Atomic Energy Authority has confirmed that its remote monitoring of radiation levels has gone dead, although there hadn't been any increases in radiation levels taking place before it did so. And so it continues. Is the war that counts the one that's taking lives in significant numbers on both sides in Ukraine? Or is it the economic war of attrition between Russia and the West? And since Vladimir Putin seems to have no graceful way out, short of victory, and he's determined not to fail because of that, what's the best case scenario out of this? Doesn't seem to be a place we're going to find within days, that's for sure. Although right now, you'd be well advised not to count anything out. It has been a crazy couple of weeks. All right, that is all for now. See you at the end of the week for the news roundup, where we will note that other things have also been happening in the world while all of this is going on. I know, hard to believe, but true. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.